This week on Penny Dreadful, we had an episode entitled Maria and the Beast. And this is the 7th episode of the first season, and I think it's probably going to be the only season just based on the ratings so far. But before I get into my thoughts on this episode, and I'm going to do just my overall thoughts on this episode briefly, and then I'll go into spoilers, and I'll give you a warning before I do that. But before I get into that, if you're new to the channel and if you're interested in seeing more of my reviews, both of this show and other upcoming shows and movies, I highly recommend subscribing so you don't miss a thing. So, getting into this episode of Penny Dreadful City of Angels. So, in case you're new to the channel, or in case it hasn't really been clear in my videos up to this point, I'm not loving this show. I don't hate it, but I'm not loving it. I would describe myself as kind of lukewarm on it. And I would say this was a particularly weak episode of a show that I'm already lukewarm on. And it's not that I think that the story is necessarily bad or that the actors aren't good or that a lot of the elements aren't working. In fact, in a lot of ways, this is one of the most immaculately produced shows on television right now. I mean, from the cinematography, there was just some excellent shots this episode. There was one shot in particular in the scene where Lewis was doing some photography, again, trying to avoid spoilers in this section. But in that scene, I thought the cinematography was just gorgeous to look at. And I feel like the whole thing has a very chic, very refined look to it. And it does at times do a pretty good job of evoking Chinatown, which John Logan has said was his goal. And I appreciate the acting, in particular Nathan Lane and Natalie Dormier. I think they're doing a strong job. But I feel that this show has kind of substituted politics for personality. And instead of being what it initially set itself up to be, which was a mystery story, you know, with investigating this vast conspiracy beneath the surface, the bad guys have always been really obvious in this. And it's because this is supposed to be more of an indictment of Trump than an actual mystery show or an actual compelling drama. And I don't care about the politics of this show. Disliking something for having a political slant is as dumb to me as liking it because it has a political slant. To me, something has to stand on its own, and then the political messages can either contribute to it being good or they can distract from it being good. And here, I would say that oftentimes the political messages are all there are. Like, I don't think that a lot of these characters have a lot of substance to them, because the story is more interested in portraying, you know, the Chicano community and in portraying, you know, a certain politician and the similarities between them and Trump and all these aspects than it is in actually setting up a story that the audience can relate to and enjoy. And we're coming off an episode that I thought was a really good episode, but this episode is more like episode 5, in my opinion, where just not a lot happens. And I think people get confused when I say that, because what I'm talking about, I'm not talking about events. Events are not story. That's what I'm talking about, is that in terms of actually advancing the plot, not a lot happened. You know, yeah, sure, some things happened, but, you know, someone goes on a hike in the woods and they kill a deer and then they get attacked by Indians. That's events. But if it doesn't tie into the character's emotional journey, then it's not a story and it's not advancing the plot. It's just a side plot. And that's kind of what this episode felt like to me. Like, there were small incremental steps forward for the plot, but overall the story is more or less where it was last week. And this show is really, really bad at continuing plot lines and just, you know, following up on threads. Like, I feel like you go weeks on end without following up on plot threads. And this week, of course, you know, we have someone who just got put away for the Hazlitt murders last week, Diego. But this week it's like the Hazlitt murders, which was, in the first episode, it kind of seemed very strongly implied that that was going to be what this show was primarily about, what Lewis and Tiago were going to be primarily investigating. And they had spent hardly any time investigating that at all. And on top of that, we've got the character of Magda, who we were kind of set up. It was going to be this war between her and Santa Muerte for humanity. And we've hardly gotten to see any of that at all. And I'm just frustrated by the lack of follow-through that this show has shown. I don't care about the politics. I'm going to reiterate that. I do not care that this show bashes certain current presidents of the United States. I don't care that it's anti-Trump. I don't care that they're trying to make Councilman Townsend a stand-in for Trump and that they're being like, oh, the Nazis are with him and even the church is with him. I don't care about that. I just care that I don't think the story is being told well. So that's my non-spoiler review / rant. Sorry if you don't like me getting political. I feel like this show just makes it impossible to not get a little bit political. But now I'm going to get into specifics with spoilers. So if you haven't seen the episode yet and you want to go ahead and watch that before you come back, go ahead and stop watching and come back later. So getting into Maria and the Beast, the 7th episode of the first season. So right off the bat, we had a scene with Tiago and Sister Molly, which was one of the more interesting scenes of the episode, in my opinion. It talked about how Tiago, and this was the only scene this episode which was really dealing with the aftermath of Tiago and Luis putting Diego away for the Hazlitt murders, which he didn't commit, so that he could be a hero to his community. And I felt like they should have spent more of this episode, and this is, again, getting into how the show doesn't follow up on threads. They should have spent more of this episode dealing with the guilt that Luis and Tiago would be feeling over what they've done, but they really ignored that, and I don't think they can come back to that in future episodes, because to me it's like it needs to happen. You need to see shades of it here for it to be effective later. And essentially Tiago has this line where he says, it wasn't a compromise, it wasn't a mistake, it was a sin. And then Sister Molly says, I meet you as you are, Tiago, no better, no worse, and I love you. And I thought that was a cool line, because I think that to a certain extent, that is what love is. You have to accept the person you love for who they are and not necessarily expect them to change or to be better. You have to accept them who they are in the moment. Now, I am starting to strongly suspect that Sister Molly probably killed Hazlitt. I don't think she killed the rest of the family. I think it was possibly her mother and her weird henchman that did that. But I feel like that would fit with a lot of the themes of this season, how even now Tiago maybe views Sister Molly more highly than he ought to, because there's things about her that he just doesn't know. But we'll see. That's just a running theory. It was either Sister Molly or it was Miss Adelaide, her mother. But I feel like it would be a little too obvious if it was the Dragon Mother, as Luis so aptly called her in this episode. But we'll see. That's just a running theory I have. We also got to see Maria, played by Adriana Barraza, who has been really underutilized this season, in my opinion. We got to see some good scenes with her this episode. We got to see Magda, under the disguise of Elsa, move in with Dr. Kraft and bring Frank with her. And I feel like they're kind of implying that Frank's father is the devil. I could be reading too much into that, but I felt like in his scenes with Dr. Kraft's son in the bedroom where he says he misses his father, I felt like that was what they were implying. And obviously just a creepy kid, but he was acting a little bit more friendly towards the Kraft boy this episode, and I felt like he almost actually wanted to be friends with him. Of course, he did kill his pet rat, I think, so not a good friend to have around. But this episode, it kind of became this battle between Maria and Elsa and Dr. Kraft, who's just kind of rolling over so that Elsa can take over his household. I'm still not sure what Elsa's end game is, but this episode we saw her getting pretty much everything she wanted and kind of gently pushing Maria out the door, this woman who's been with Dr. Kraft for a very long time. And, obviously we had a little bit of 21st century political spin here with Elsa saying, a mixture of cultures under the same roof? Ugh, how dreadful. Get rid of Maria. And Dr. Kraft's like, well, that's how they do things in Pasadena, but yeah, maybe, you are kind of persuasive when you bat those eyelashes at me. Maybe you're making some good points after all. So, Dr. Kraft, again, a good man, maybe, but totally under the sway of Elsa. And let's see how far he goes down this, devilish road. We also, we got to see a little bit more of Councilman Beck, played by Christine Estabrook, and she had a scene with Alex, another one of Magda's characters, disguises, and it was, this was where I got a little frustrated because I don't care if they compare Councilman Townsend to Trump. I do not care if they do that. But this was just kind of heavy-handed. It was like the dialogue was like, a racist demagogue without a single scruple? President of the United States? It's like, okay, you're clearly talking about Trump. Don't even pretend you're not. And then, Councilman Beck's like, and who's going to vote for him? And Alex is like, every angry man and woman who feels that you and Mr. Roosevelt has betrayed them. And like, I get it. Some of this is historical. Some of this is, very accurate to things that happened in history. I'm just saying the show is not setting up good villains. It's just so intent on indicting President Trump that it is making these really banal characters be the villains, and it's just not that interesting in my opinion. And this is just my opinion, and I realize that, but I would rather see interesting villains than these really pathetic characters. And I get that that's, again, commentary on Trump because the writers think that Trump is pathetic, so they don't want to make these villains actually intimidating. But I've seen characters in shows that are clearly modeled after Trump and other current American villains, shall we say, and they've done a good job of making those characters simultaneously interesting and intimidating and showing things about Trump that are problematic at the same time. And to me, this show just isn't doing that. They're just going after Trump so heavy-handedly, and they're not really making any points that aren't obvious to anybody who doesn't already disagree with Trump. If you already agree with Trump, this is just like having a paper cut and then putting lemon juice on it. It doesn't actually make any valid points. It's all preaching to the choir. We had, some brief scenes with Tiago's family. We got to see a little bit more of Raul, played by Adam Rodriguez, and Maria basically called him out for sitting around and not saying anything. And I felt like that was a little on the nose because it's like that's actually all he's been doing since episode 1, from what I can tell. Other than getting shot in the head, he hasn't really contributed a whole lot to this story. And then we, of course, got a scene between Josefina and Mateo, played by Johnathan, Nieves, and Jessica Garza. And basically, the scene was really poorly written. Basically, she said, "Oh, I'm going to the temple. I found my faith." And he's like, "No, I don't have a sister." And it's like, okay, that's really judgmental of you. Like, she finds religion, and now you don't have a sister. Like, they needed to make it clearer what he was objecting to exactly, because it seemed like he was just objecting to her being religious, which doesn't really fit with the themes of this show. It seems very odd for him to be so judgmental against that when the whole point of the show is tolerance. Lewis brings Tiago on board his investigation of his 2 friends that were murdered. And a big scene this episode was we found out that Miss Adelaide is in league with the Nazis and Councilman Townsend. And, of course, this fits in pretty nicely with the Trump parallel. I don't think any of these characters are particularly interesting. I think it's just more heavy-handed political messaging. And again, I don't care that they're going there. I just care that they're not making the show interesting by going there. And that's just my opinion, and I realize that, but I'm going to keep saying it because I think it's true. The biggest, I think, most interesting scene this episode, and I think this is the last thing I want to talk about, is the scene between Maria and Magda and Santa Muerte. And I felt like like I said, there hasn't been enough of this season. This is what I feel like a lot of us were intrigued by in the pilot episode. We were intrigued by the Hazlitt murders and the concept of this war for humanity between Magda and Santa Muerte. And this episode, finally utilized Adriana Barraza, and I hope that they can utilize her more going forward because, gee whiz, she was terrific here. And, I think it's funny that this show is kind of having her main role be as the person who's watching Dr. Kraft's children, because I think most people know her, at least in the U.S., from her role in Babel, playing the caretaker for Brad Pitt and Cate Blanchett's children, where she received an Oscar nomination for that role. And here, I just felt like this was a really good scene where she was facing off with Magda, and it was kind of like, them just throwing down the gauntlet. And she eventually pushed her away, but it's interesting because it almost seems like they're saying Magda is the devil. And I think that would fit because oftentimes in Christianity, the beast refers to the devil or it refers to the Antichrist. And here you've got Magda offering Maria everything that she wants if she'll just basically align herself with her. And she refuses and says, "Get away from me." So it kind of parallels, in some ways, I would say, Christ's temptation in the desert in Scripture. And it was interesting because we found out, Maria's spirit guide is the coyote or the coyote. And she basically says, "I am a dog, that is my strength." And there were just some really good dialogue during this scene, and I thought it was a great acting showcase. I felt like Natalie Dormier and Adriana Barraza just acted the heck out of this scene, and Santa Muerte basically just rolled over. And Lorenza Izzo, she's good, but she's not really contributing to the story yet, and I'm not really sure what Santa Muerte's role ultimately is going to be. All she seems to do is show up after bad things have happened and carry people away. So I really would like to see her actually offer some kind of alternative to Magda. And it was interesting because at one point Magda during the scene said, she's like a good villain because everything she says makes sense, but you can't go along with her anyway because even though what she says makes sense, she's not on your side. And at one point she says, she is the icy finger of death, referring to Santa Muerte, her sister, and you worship her. I give mankind what it wants, and you hate me. Now, where's the sense in that, Maria? And again, everything she just says makes perfect sense, but you can't go along with her because she's the villain. And, she says, "I can be your savior. I can bring you peace." And Maria ultimately just says, "No, I'm not going to go along with you." And I don't really know what most of Magda's goals are. Like, I don't know what she's hoping to accomplish with Councilman Townsend. Obviously, stirring up racial strife is some of it. She seems like she would actually like to see him become president of the United States. It would be kind of funny if this show did like an Inglourious Bastards or a Once Upon a Time in Hollywood or a Plot Against America, which is a more direct parallel, where you have Councilman Townsend actually become president of the United States. But I don't think that's what's going to happen. But it would be an interesting way to go. But again, I don't think we're going to get more seasons of this. I just don't think the ratings are high enough. I'm not saying I don't want more seasons of this, but I just don't think that there's enough interest in this so far from viewers. And maybe the people that are not watching it live, that are watching it digitally and other means is enough to make up for the fact that people aren't watching it live. But it seems like pretty low ratings to me for Showtime, and I have a hard time imagining a show that looks this expensive is going to stick around if it doesn't get a ton of viewers. So those are my thoughts. I'm pretty lukewarm on this show, as I said. I don't hate it. I don't love it. I'm just kind of hoping that it ends on a high note and that I can justify having watched the whole season. I'm hoping that the end of the narrative is better than the middle, but we'll see where it goes. What did you think, though? Let me know in the comments. And if you are liking these videos and you want to see more, please consider subscribing. And as always, you can watch more videos right now. That's my review of Penny Dreadful, City of Angels, Season 1, Episode 7, Maria and the Beast.